You know, when you try to completely wipe a computer hard drive, there's this persistent illusion of permanence.
Oh, absolutely.
Like you drag your files to the trash, you empty it, maybe you even run some kind of formatting utility, and you look at that blank screen and you think, okay, it's perfectly pristine.
Yeah,
The data is gone forever.
right. Because the intention is total destruction. You're trying to leave behind this perfectly clean slate, but a forensic IT specialist looking at that exact same drive, they see a completely different landscape.
Right. They see everything.
Exactly. They
Yeah.
plug in, they run a recovery tool, and suddenly they're pulling up, thousands of fragments.
Ghosts in the machine.
Exactly, the ghost of the machine. It turns out that erasing something completely, like leaving absolutely zero trace of its existence, is actually one of the most difficult things to achieve.
Yeah.
And that's true whether we're talking about digital data or, human history.
Yeah. And that tension, that friction between attempting total erasure and the inevitable fragments left behind, that's really the engine driving our deep dive today. Because, okay, let's unpack this. We are looking at a truly wild stack of source material today.
I know, it is fascinating.
It's all over the place, but in the best way. We've got archaeological field notes from southern France. We're looking through translated Inquisition records from the 13th century, some modern forensic pathology case files, and even this really strange travelogue dealing with past life regression.
Yeah, quite a mix.
It is. And the mission here is to trace how medieval powers used fire, not just as a brutal method of execution, but as a calculated tool for ideological deletion.
Right, like hitting the ultimate delete button.
Yes, exactly. Hitting delete on a massive threat to their power. But what's so crazy is that in their desperation to leave no trace, they accidentally manufactured centuries of these enduring legends, missing treasure, and some really fascinating modern scientific breakthroughs.
They basically created the exact thing they were trying to destroy.
Exactly. So to set the scene, we are in 13th century southern France.
Right, the Languedoc region specifically.
Okay, yeah. And the Catholic Church and the French crown have basically united their resources to launch the Albigensian Crusade. And they are targeting a breakaway Christian movement known as the Cathars.
Yeah, and to understand the sheer scale of this attempted erasure, you really have to understand how terrifying the Cathars were to the establishment.
Right, because they practice a strict form of dualism.
Exactly. They believed in two opposing deities. You had a god of pure spirit, the good God, and a god of physical matter, who they viewed as fundamentally evil.
Wait, so everything physical was evil?
Everything, the earth, wealth, and most importantly, the human body. Our sources illuminate this so brilliantly. The Cathars believed that the physical world was inherently corrupt. So human bodies were essentially, meat prisons.
Ooh, prisons, wow.
Yeah, designed by a malevolent creator just to trap divine souls.
That is dark.
It is. And so purity, in their eyes, could only be achieved through successive reincarnations, basically shedding the material world completely over time to reunite with the spiritual God.
Which, if you think about it, means they completely rejected the entire foundation of medieval Catholic power.
Oh, 100%.
Because the church's authority, it rested heavily on physical assets, right?
Right.
Massive cathedrals, vast land holdings, tithes, physical sacraments.
Right, the Eucharist, baptism by water, all of it.
Yeah. So by declaring everything tangible to be the work of an evil god, the Cathars weren't just debating scripture. They were actively delegitimizing the wealth and authority of the Pope and the French nobility.
There was an existential threat. They were a direct economic and political wrecking ball aimed right at the Vatican. The Cathars undermined the entire socioeconomic structure of medieval Europe.
So the church naturally responds with overwhelming military force.
Right. They spend decades trying to eradicate them. We're talking crusade, followed by the Inquisition. By 1232, the movement had been systematically dismantled. They were hunted down until only a single defiant stronghold remained.
Montsegur.
It functioned as their spiritual capital and their treasury.
And looking at the archaeological descriptions of this place, you immediately understand why it was their final sanctuary. It is basically a medieval rebel base carved into the sky.
Yeah, it's not just a castle, it's a geographic anomaly.
It really is. It sits nearly 4,000 feet up in the Pyrenees on this massive, sheer limestone ridge that the locals call a pog. POG, right?
Yep, Umaga. And the topography is so extreme there that the fortress walls are practically indistinguishable from the vertical cliff face itself.
The walls and the cliff are basically the same thing.
Exactly. The defensive advantages of a pog like that just cannot be overstated.
Hmm.
Traditional medieval siege warfare, moving massive wooden towers, battering rams, thousands of men rushing a wall, all of that is completely useless at Montsegur.
Because you can't push a siege tower up a vertical cliff.
Right. Gravity is a huge problem.
Yeah.
So you've got this population of perhaps 400 to 600 people up there. It's a mix of civilian refugees, fighting men, and the Cathar religious elite, who are called the Perfects.
And they must have felt untouchable.
They absolutely did.
Which probably explains the sheer audacity of what they did in 1242. Because the sources say that men ride out from this sky-high sanctuary, go down, and assassinate 2 Dominican inquisitors at a place called Avignonet.
Yeah, it was a massive provocation.
Like poking a bear.
Exactly. And that assassination forced the French crown's hand. It triggered this completely disproportionate royal response designed to just end the Cathar problem permanently.
So by May of 1243, a royal seneschal named Hugh des Arcis arrives at the base of the mountain. And he brings an army estimated at 10,000 soldiers.
Right. 10,000 trained soldiers against a few hundred people on a rock.
But because of those sheer cliffs, I mean, those 10,000 soldiers might as well have been on the moon.
Yeah, numbers don't matter if you can't reach the target.
Right. So they couldn't storm the gates. They were basically forced into this grueling strategy of starvation. They encircle the base of the mountain and just wait for the brutal Pyrenean winter to do their work for them.
And that siege dragged on for 10 agonizing months.
10 months in the freezing cold.
Yeah, but the defenders were surprisingly resilient. They were aided by local sympathizers who knew these hidden, treacherous mountain paths. So they were smuggling in vital supplies under the cover of darkness.
Wow. But eventually the stalemate breaks, right?
It does. The Crusaders basically realize they need specialists. So they bring in Basque mercenaries, these men who are accustomed to fighting in extreme mountainous terrain.
Right, mountain warfare guys.
Exactly. And these mercenaries managed this incredibly perilous nighttime climb up a near-vertical eastern face. They secured a tiny foothold just below the summit.
And that foothold changes everything. Because reading the sources detailing how they managed to drag the massive components of a catapult timber by timber up that sheer cliff face, it's mind-blowing.
It is a logistical nightmare, but they did it. And once that catapult was assembled, they began a relentless day and night bombardment.
And the toll that took must have been devastating.
Oh, absolutely. It rained massive stones down on the fragile refugee huts outside the main keep, which forced hundreds of starving people to cram into the central fortress.
Oh, so the overcrowding, the lack of food, the constant bombardment.
Right. It all compounds. By March of 1244, the structural and human defenses completely collapsed. The garrison really had no choice but to negotiate a surrender.
And this is where the story gets so dark, because the terms of that surrender are just chilling. The Crusaders deliver a very simple ultimatum. They say, renounce your Cathar faith, walk down the mountain, and you can live. Or refuse and be burned alive.
Right. And they grant the defenders a 2-week truce to make their decision.
14 days to just sit there and think about burning alive.
Agonizing. But the outcome of those 14 days was extraordinary. Not a single Cathar leader recanted.
Not one.
Not one. In fact, the sources show that during that fortnight of fasting and prayer, several of the ordinary soldiers and civilians inside the fortress actively chose to receive the consolamentum.
Which is their ultimate sacrament, right?
Yes, the ultimate Cathar sacrament of purification.
Hmm.
By taking it, they knowingly elevated themselves to the status of perfects. And they were fully aware that doing so signed their own death warrants. They were opting into the fire.
Okay, wait, I need to interject here because something about this logic just feels inherently contradictory to me based on the sources.
How so?
Well, if the Cathars genuinely believed that the physical body was a demonic prison, right? An illusion that trapped the soul away from the divine light, wouldn't burning alive be exactly what they wanted?
I see what you're saying.
Right. Why would the church, their sworn enemy, utilize a method of execution that essentially fulfills Cathar theology by destroying the material shell?
That is such a great point, and it's the crucial tension at the heart of this entire event. Because for the Cathar perfects, who spent their entire lives striving for absolute detachment from the material world, the fire was indeed viewed as a final liberation.
The flames consumed the prison.
Exactly. But the church's motivation wasn't about the victim's experience at all. They didn't care if the Cathars felt liberated. The church was entirely focused on the aftermath.
Oh, I see. They were thinking about the surviving followers.
Bingo. The Inquisition understood the mechanics of martyrdom perfectly. In the medieval mindset, a saint or a martyr was anchored to the physical world through their remains.
Like bones and relics.
Right. You made pilgrimages to the bones of saints, you built elaborate shrines over their graves. By using fire, and specifically managing that fire to reduce the bodies to absolute ash, the church intended to deny the Cathar movement any physical focal point.
No bones, no relics, no shrine.
Exactly. If you obliterate the physical trace, you theoretically obliterate the movement's future.
It really is the medieval equivalent of wiping the hard drive. So on March 16th, 1244, the truce expires. Over 200 Cathars walk voluntarily out of the keep, down the mountainside, and into a wooden stockade where they are immolated.
Yeah.
And the site is still marked today as Prat dels Cremats, the field of the burned.
It's a horrifying end to the siege. But, as we discussed earlier with the hard drive, total erasure is nearly impossible. While the Inquisition was entirely focused on the flames and the ashes, a covert operation was taking place in the shadows that would completely subvert their attempt to wipe the slate clean.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting, because this part of the source material reads like a Hollywood thriller.
Oh, definitely.
We have the actual Inquisition testimonies from the Duat collection at the French National Library. And these records confirm that on the very night the martyrs were burning, two men, Emile Icard and Hugh de Villiers, were actively rappelling down the sheer, terrifying precipice of the mountain.
Right. In the dark.
In the dark, slipping right through the Crusader patrol lines.
The logistical difficulty of that descent is just staggering. You have an army surrounding the base, fires burning, and these two are going down a cliff face.
And their mission was the ultimate priority for the surviving Cathar underground, wasn't it?
Yes. They were escaping to protect the treasury. Because weeks before the surrender, two other operatives, Mathieu and Pierre Bonnet, had managed to smuggle out the bulk of the Cathar wealth.
And the Latin records describe this hoard as pecuniam infinitum.
Infinite money.
Infinite money, along with gold and silver. They had hidden it deep in the surrounding forests. So Icard and Villiers successfully navigate this treacherous terrain. They recover the hidden wealth and they transport it to the fortified castle of Muson. And from there, the men and the infinite money completely vanish from the historical record. Just gone.
What's fascinating here is how the intersection of those two events, the violent physical erasure of the Cathar bodies on one hand, and a highly documented permanent disappearance of their immense wealth on the other, it created this massive historical vacuum.
Right.
The church tried to leave absolutely nothing behind, but instead they left a massive unsolved mystery. And that vacuum immediately invited speculation, legend, and an endless hunt for this lost treasure.
And the ripples of that mystery, they extend much further than you'd think. The sources draw a fascinating line connecting this 13th century escape to one of the most famous modern treasure hunts, the Oak Island Money Pit in Nova Scotia.
Yeah, that connection is wild. It all comes down to the family of one of those escapees, Hugh de Villiers.
Right.
The de Villiers lineage is a remarkably consistent thread through centuries of secretive wealth management. The family were wealthy patrons of the Knights Templar, yet they clearly harbored deep sympathies for the persecuted Cathars. They basically acted as trusted guardians for both factions.
Which sets up this unbelievable historical echo because fast forward 63 years, so we're in 1307 in Paris. The King of France is about to launch a surprise mass arrest of the Knights Templar to seize all their wealth. But on the eve of that raid, a man named Hugues de Chalon, from the exact same de Villiers family line, vanishes from the city. He reportedly leads 50 horses loaded with the Templar treasury out of Paris, puts to sea on 18 galleys, and just disappears into history.
It's the same family playing the exact same role of trusted guardian, executing the exact same vanishing act with immense wealth. The pattern is undeniable.
It really is.
And that lineage tracks steadily forward into the 17th century, where a descendant serving as a knight commander establishes a fortified priory in Acadia, Nova Scotia.
Which is just a few miles from Oak Island.
Exactly. Deeply intertwining the Cathar escape from Montsegur with the endless excavations and theories surrounding the Oak Island mystery today.
It is incredible how deeply these events imprint themselves on human imagination. And it's not just treasure hunters. This stack includes a piece from Country Life magazine that perfectly captures this, lingering psychological weight of Montsegur.
Oh, the reincarnation story.
Yes. The author describes her great-grandfather taking a trip to the ruins of Montsegur in the 20th century. He's just a modern guy hiking up this freezing, desolate peak. But standing there among the stones, he is suddenly overwhelmed by a terrifying, visceral sense of déjà vu.
Wow.
He experiences the physical sensation of extreme panic, of fleeing down the mountain and being engulfed by flames. And for the rest of his life, this man was absolutely convinced he was a reincarnated Cathar who perished in that fire.
Regardless of how one interprets past life regression, the anecdote illustrates the sheer gravity of Montsegur. The violence of that attempted erasure left a scar on the cultural landscape that resonates centuries later.
It really does.
The church sought to enforce absolute silence, but the location itself continues to broadcast its history.
But the horrifying reality is that Montsegur wasn't just an isolated tragedy. The Inquisition recognized the utility of total physical destruction. It became their calculated blueprint, like their R&D, for dealing with anyone deemed an ideological threat.
Yes. The blueprint developed in 1244 was codified and weaponized across Europe. We see it deployed with chilling precision later on against Jan Hus.
Right, Jan Hus in 1415.
Exactly. His execution really demonstrates the refinement of this strategy. Hus was a Czech theologian, and his fierce critiques of the church's immense wealth and corrupt practices like the selling of indulgences made him a massive threat. He was essentially a precursor to the Protestant Reformation.
So the authorities invite him to the Council of Constance, and they give him a strict promise of safe conduct, right? Like, come talk to us, you'll be safe.
Yeah, that was the bait. But the moment he arrives, they completely ignore the guarantee. They throw him in a dungeon for over 2 months and demand he recant.
But he refuses, stating he will only yield to Scripture.
Right, and when he refuses, they enact the Montsegur Protocol.
And the theatricality of the degradation is just, it was so deliberate, they publicly defrocked him, forced him to wear a paper crown painted with demons, and burned him at the stake.
But the crucial detail is what happened after he died. The authorities ordered his clothes, his shoes, and his personal effects to be thrown into the flames too.
Because they knew the clothing could become a relic.
Exactly. They recognized that the clothing of a martyr could become just as potent a relic as bone. They were terrified of leaving a physical focal point.
So they systematically sweep up every single speck of ash and explicitly cart it away to dump into the Rhine River.
Total deletion.
And then, 16 years later, we see the absolute apex of this paranoia with Joan of Arc in 1431.
Joan of Arc presented a unique political and theological crisis for the English and their allied clerics. I mean, here's a 19-year-old French peasant girl who claimed divine guidance and successfully rallied armies against them.
Yeah.
When they finally captured her and orchestrated a trial for heresy in Rouen, their primary objective wasn't just her death, it was the total annihilation of her legacy.
And the mechanics of her execution revealed just how desperate they were. So, after the initial fire killed her via smoke inhalation, the executioners realized her internal organs had survived the flames.
Right.
So they ordered the pyre to be completely rebuilt and lit a second time. And when that still wasn't enough, they burned the remains a third time, generating this intense, sustained heat until every piece of bone was reduced to fine powder.
And then, following the Jan Hus blueprint exactly, they gathered the powder and threw it into the Seine River.
But the profound irony of this strategy is that it completely backfired.
It really did.
Yeah.
The authorities operated on this medieval assumption that veneration requires a localized shrine.
Yeah.
You go to Rome for St. Peter or Santiago de Compostela for St. James.
Right.
They believed that by scattering Joan of Arc and Jan Hus into rivers that ultimately wash out into the ocean, they were diffusing their power into nothingness.
But it's the dandelion effect.
The dandelion effect.
Yeah, you try to violently crush the flower, and all you do is blow the seeds across the entire field.
Oh, that's a great way to put it.
By denying Joan of Arc a tomb in Rouen, they inadvertently ensured she couldn't be confined to a single city. Her martyrdom became universal.
Depriving followers of a physical relic forces the legacy into the realm of pure idea, and ideas are significantly harder to extinguish than bone. However, this lack of physical remains also generated an intense friction with human nature.
Because nature abhors a vacuum.
Right.
So does religious devotion. People desperately craved a tangible connection to these erased figures. And because there were no authentic ashes, that demand fueled this incredibly lucrative medieval market for fakes.
The medieval relic economy was vast and was largely unregulated. When a cathedral or a monastery needed to attract pilgrims, And let's be honest, the revenue they brought relics would miraculously materialize, completely detached from historical reality.
Which brings us to the most fascinating scientific intersection in our sources, the Joan of Arc relic hoax.
Yes, the Paris jar.
Yes. So, in 1867, this dusty glass jar is discovered hidden away in the loft of a Parisian apothecary. The label clearly identifies the contents as remains found beneath the stake of Joan of Arc at Rouen.
And what's inside?
The jar contains a heavily charred human rib, fragments of burned wood, a scrap of linen, and, bizarrely, the femur of a cat.
Now, the inclusion of the cat bone is a brilliant detail that actually lent the find massive credibility at the time.
Really? A cat bone made it credible.
Yeah, because historical records confirmed the medieval practice of tossing black cats onto the pyres of accused witches to appease or ward off the devil.
Oh, wow.
So people saw the cat bone and thought, this has to be real. The church accepted the provenance of these items, placed them in a museum in Tours, and for over a century they were venerated by the public as the literal remains of the Maid of Orleans.
Until 2007, when the Vatican granted Dr. Philippe Cherlier, a leading forensic scientist, permission to subject these relics to rigorous 21st century analysis.
He didn't just look at them under a microscope either.
No, he used carbon-14 dating and mass spectroscopy to break down their atomic and chemical composition. And the results are just staggering.
The forensic data completely dismantled the 19th century narrative. Carbon-14 dating conclusively proved the human rib was not from the 15th century. It dated all the way back to between the 3rd and 6th century BCE.
Meaning it was an Egyptian mummy.
Exactly.
The famous charred rib of the French saint was actually thousands of years old.
And the mass spectroscopy results explained the visual deception perfectly. The black coating on the bone, which generations had just assumed was charring from the fires of Rouen, was chemically identified as an ancient vegetal and mineral matrix.
Embalming resin.
It was Egyptian embalming resin. The forger had simply found a piece of mummified remains, which were surprisingly common in 19th century apothecaries, and repackaged it.
And the final nail in the coffin was the odor analysis. The scientific team detected a distinct, strong scent of vanilla emanating from the jar.
Which is a huge red flag.
Right, because if a human body is immolated in a raging fire, the resulting ash does not smell like vanilla.
Definitely not.
But vanillin is a specific chemical compound naturally synthesized during the long-term decomposition of mummified tissue. The science provides absolute clarity here, exposing centuries of blind faith as just a desperate projection.
The exposure of the hoax really forces us to reflect on the nature of belief itself. The forensic tools at our disposal today, mass spectroscopy, carbon dating, they allow us to pierce through the myth-making and the deliberate forgeries of the past. They demand critical thinking.
Yeah?
But simultaneously, this story exposes a deeply entrenched human vulnerability. Our desire for physical connection is so profound that we will willingly suspend our disbelief, venerating an Egyptian mummy, simply because we yearn for a tangible piece of a hero whose existence was deliberately scrubbed from the earth.
It's so true. Looking back over the terrain we've covered today, the sheer scope of this history is breathtaking. I mean, we started on the icy, jagged peak of Montsegur, watching as the Cathars sent their immense wealth into the darkness while voluntarily stepping into the flames.
Right.
We tracked the calculated evolution of that horrific erasure through the ash-filled rivers of Jan Hus and Joan of Arc. And we finally arrived in a sterile, modern laboratory in Paris, watching forensic chemistry unravel a century-old deception.
And it leads to a fascinating final consideration. Think about it. The inquisitors and executioners who orchestrated these burnings believed they were systematically deleting their enemies from the historical record.
They really thought they were hitting delete.
They burned the bodies, destroyed the clothing, and scattered the ashes specifically to ensure no artifacts remained. But in their ruthless pursuit of nothingness, they guaranteed the exact opposite. By leaving us with empty rivers and unproven legends of infinite gold slipping down a mountain in the dead of night, they ensured we would remain captivated by their victims nearly 8 centuries later. Perhaps the most enduring relics left behind aren't bones or scraps of linen at all. Perhaps the true relics are the mysteries themselves.